let's get to this question over whether Donald Trump sort of October surprised himself with that, we'll say, controversial rally at Madison Square Garden. Put this up on the screen. So this is this data scientist who, I'm just gonna put my cards on the table. I don't credit his philosophy here very much because he relies on the betting odds. He uses the betting odds and then has his own proprietary model to project what he thinks is going to happen in terms of the electoral college. But he has had some success in the past, so let's take a look at what this individual has to say. The headline here from Fortune, which wrote up these data results, are October surprise, Trump just blew a huge lead in the Madison Square Garden rally, started the drop, says a top data scientist. They say Donald Trump is suffering an historic descent in the campaign's final days, an ongoing free fall that is turning what looked like a walkway for the former president into what's most likely a Kamala Harris victory. That is the view from Thomas Miller, data scientist at Northwestern University, whose proprietary models proven right on in past elections. And so basically what Miller takes a look at is not just the betting markets, but then he's got his own, I don't know, special whatever that he applies to it. And he found that prior to Madison Square Garden, at the time when everybody was feeling like, oh, the polls are tightening and, Polymarket had Trump as like a 70% favorite to win, et cetera, he found, according to his model, that Trump really was on track for a significant electoral college victory. And then that really falls off a cliff with Madison Square Garden, Tony Hinchcliffe, the other, comments that were made at that, the overall coverage of and vibe of that rally, and that Trump's odds really fell off a cliff after that. The quote here is, Miller's numbers show a jaw-dropping swing to Harris that would have seemed unimaginable 2 weeks ago. And so, as I said, Saagar, I don't necessarily credit this model that much because I don't know that I even buy that it's possible to have that dramatic of a swing at this point in the country's history when voters are, by and large, pretty locked in about how they think about Roe versus Wade, how they think about Donald Trump, how they think about January 6th, et cetera. But I do think we have some additional data that pretty consistently shows that the bulk of the late deciders are tending to break for Kamala Harris. And there's been a significant number of focus groups, too, where undecided voters described the Madison Square Garden and the rhetoric there as kind of like the final straw that reminded them of all the things they didn't like about Donald Trump, and they just felt like they couldn't, suck it up and vote for him or deal with that level of ugliness, chaos, et cetera. And so reminding them of that in those final days really did kind of eat into his margins and cause some shift among those few late deciding voters towards Kamala Harris.
I mean, that's why I want to do this segment is it genuinely is a Rorschach test. For me, it seems psychotic that it's like, oh yeah, it's the MSG Tony Hinchcliffe joke. That's what put you over the edge. Not all the other stuff that Trump has said. He's been in national life for almost, 12 years?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back, birtherism started in 2011? Is that correct? So that's 13 years ago. So that's what put you over the edge. Not even something that Trump said. It was at his rally, and it was what other people were saying at his rally. Okay, frankly, you should have your head examined. But that is the big theory that the Harris campaign, media wants us to believe it too. And that's why I want to do it. I'm like, I don't buy this stuff at all. I just do not see how these quote unquote late deciders who are making up their mind are doing so based upon something that, again, is not even Trump related per se. I think the only case that you could make that it has hurt Trump is the media coverage of it, if anything, and the ongoing discussion relative to any positive message that he's been able to put out there, which I think that's actually a fair one, right? Which is that it could have people reminded of like, oh, is this what the Trump presidency is going to be like again? Are we just constantly going to have Fox and Friends segments about whether what did he say about Mika Brzezinski? He said she had like a shitty facelift.
Face was bleeding or whatever.
All right, so it's like, is that what the presidency is going to look like? Or is it going to be something that actually has to do with my own life? The data scientist stuff I thought was interesting because the thing is, and this has been a big media talking point, can we put C4 please up on the screen, is the Harris campaign is running with this wild. They are claiming that absolutely MSG is what really pushed these late deciding voters to come home to the Democratic Party. They have put out, they say, quote, significant advantage in these late deciding voters, and that they have seen significant movement. It's like, what is it, 2-to-1 margin over the garbage thing. I saw some quote that they had where somebody was even reacting to Trump in the garbage truck, and they were like, well, that only reminded me of the whole Puerto Rico situation.
Well, they didn't even know about the Biden comments.
Right.
So when they saw him in the garbage truck, they thought he was just like doubling down
which,
on calling
by the way,
Puerto
is
Rico
another
garbage island.
reminder too of what people in the median voter, they're not paying attention, respective to people who, let's say, watch the show. But again, for me to believe it would be that there are all these Latinos out there who was like, I'm about to vote for Trump. But because of what Tony Hinchcliffe said about Puerto Rico, that's enough for me to come home to Kamala Harris. Sorry, I just don't buy it. I absolutely don't buy it at all. Even if you are straight up Puerto Rican, that's really enough for you to switch your vote? Seems nuts, especially if you're the type of person who's going to vote for Trump the first time anyway. It's just, again, ridiculous. But the data that they have, that's what they're claiming. That's another reason I'm suspect of it, is it just seems all too cute, all too perfect for a media narrative they already hate anyway, and that love racism, conversation, whatever, for them to have this, and that's why the Harris campaign is leaking it to them. Now, of course, should we really take what the Harris campaign itself seriously? I take it just as seriously as when the Trump people are like, we're seeing absolute blowout turnout in New Hampshire. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to win New Hampshire.
But what I'm looking at is actually the polling data that suggests, like the New York Times Siena poll that we talked about earlier showed late-breaking voters going, lopsidedly towards Kamala Harris. There was a Univision YouGov poll of Pennsylvania Latino voters. They did not like the comments, and they also had a huge divide in favor of Kamala Harris. She led Trump 64-30 among Pennsylvania Latinos. So here's why I don't want to overstate it, right? But when Trump was at his best during his campaign and his poll numbers were the highest and he looked like he had the highest probability to win, is when he was being relatively quiet. And it allowed his approval rating to improve, where people have short-term memories and they kind of forgot, like, some of the things about him that they really hated last time around. They kind of forgot, some of the ugliness and the divisiveness and all of that stuff. And so you pair the fact that you've got the Kamala Harris campaign prosecuting a case, not just about like, oh, Trump's a fascist, but this guy's a divider, right? Like, we're the ones that are going to put the country back together and we need to leave this ugliness in the past. And at the very time they're trying to prosecute that case, Trump and his campaign are out there at Madison Square Garden, and with other comments, by the way, sort of proving the point of all of this stuff you don't like about this guy, like, it's still there, here it is on display, etc. So, one of the reasons Trump has really stayed in the game and had such a strong shot this time around is that his approval rating is significantly better than it was in the past. So, I think there's a reasonable case to be made that reminding people of their least favorite parts of his character traits here at the end has not served the campaign. And again, when you look at the actual polling of late-breaking voters, it does seem to pretty consistently show that they are moving towards Kamala Harris. So, I wouldn't say it's like, oh, just because of this one joke. It's that the whole tenor of that rally fit into a Kamala Harris campaign narrative and was for some voters kind of like a final reminder or a final straw that really pushed them into the Harris camp. So in that way, we're talking about small margins here, et cetera. I do think that it may have been, if Kamala Harris wins, at the end of the day, we may look back at that rally and say that it did end up being consequential. It also came at a time when they were feeling really hyper, super confident and felt like they could kind of just like let it all hang out. And I'm not sure the voting public were excited about what they had to see
I think that's a convenient narrative for people who always want to get jazzed up about these things. I just don't believe it. I think if Kamala loses, or if Kamala wins, it's going to be all abortion all day long. I really do. Yeah.
On the polling that shows late-breaking voters going for her, like, do you buy that polling, or you don't think it's true?
Because first of all, it's such a small sample. Second, like in the New York Times Siena, we're going crosstab diving on like 800 to 2,000 people. Even within that, it's like, the sample gets down to like a couple of dozen then. We're talking about late-breaking. Univision, again, for Univision to be true, then the entire Latino realignment is fake. If 60-30 break is basically a 2016 margin for Latinos. So that you have to ask me, after 8 years of watching this movement happen, do I believe that? No, absolutely not. Especially whenever we've seen previous, weren't you telling me in Philadelphia that the biggest movement was the Puerto Rican neighborhoods towards Trump? So, okay, again, like, if I want to put myself in the headspace, Puerto Rican guy lives in Philly who supports Trump, is the Tony Hinchcliffe joke that's really gonna be like, you know what? I'm supporting Kamala Harris. I just don't buy it. Like, these are the type of people who hate political correctness. They're exactly the type of people who are on YouTube watching, Tony Hinchcliffe comedy and think it's hilarious. Like, that's the cultural milieu that if you're a Latino supporting Trump, that's kind of what you swim in, is saying, if we've seen the data, the vast majority of the Latino movement to the Republican Party started with Latinx, that terminology some 4 or 5 years ago, and increasingly is moving along blue-collar cultural lines away from political correctness, which is the exact type of people who get all spun up about Madison Square Garden. So you really would have to believe that the entire Latino shift and all of that is fake. Now, look, it actually could be possible that it's all totally, overstated. If there's a Harris landslide, it will be fake, and I'll eat another sock. Okay? Yeah, we can do it again.
Just to lay out the rest of these numbers. So they asked Pennsylvania Latino voters, generally speaking, do you feel Trump is disrespectful or respectful towards the Latino community? 64% said disrespectful, 28% said respectful. They asked, what is closest to your view about the remarks at Madison Square Garden by the Trump campaign? 69% said they were more racist than humorous. 17% said they were more humorous than racist. Only 14% actually said they hadn't heard enough about the remarks, which might be the most interesting number there. But, I find it, to me, it's not so hard to imagine that it's not just this vote. It's like that brings up, I remember how he treated Puerto Ricans after Hurricane Maria. There's a corollary to like the sense that some men have gotten from the Democratic side of like, I just feel like they don't want me in their coalition. Like, I feel a sense of contempt. And of course, voters are gonna pick up on that sense of like, this is not a club that I'm really ever gonna be part of. So again, I don't wanna overstate it, but I do think that there's something to the fact that certainly if you wanted to choose how you were going to close out the campaign, Madison Square Garden, and some of the comments that Trump has made since then are not all that helpful.
Well, we can play some of those.
Yeah, so we have
C3.
C2.
Oh, sorry, that's on Puerto Rico.
Yeah, C2, where Trump was, asked about the Puerto Rico joke. Now, his campaign thought this was a problem right away. They put out a statement trying to distance themselves from Tony Hinchcliffe. Trump, of course, though, he's, again, totally incapable of any sort of message discipline. So he says, I didn't see any problem with it. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, I guess somebody put on a comedian, and he joked. He was a comedian. He joked. He mentioned Puerto Rico. And all of a sudden, the Democrats, and they are good at this stuff, by the way. That's the only thing they're good at. They're no good at policy. They're no good at government. They're good at other things. They're very good at cheating. But other than that, they're not good at anything. So let me just so they come up, and a comedian put in early in the show as a filler, in all fairness. I guess he said some joke. I haven't heard the joke, but he said some joke. And he mentioned Puerto Rico. All of a sudden, they come out with something about Puerto Rico. Nobody's been better to Puerto Rico than me. I saved Puerto Rico when they had some of the worst hurricanes, really bad. I brought in the hospital ship, the Mercy. I brought in this massive hospital ship. There's nobody, and Puerto Ricans will tell you that, nobody's done more for Puerto Rico than me.
Classic Trump. Nobody's done more for Puerto Rico than me. He also made some comments at a recent rally. I'll just play them for you. Part of it is talking about how, he wouldn't mind so much if someone had to shoot through the fake news. And then the other part is him talking about how maybe he should never have left the White House even after he lost. Of course, he doesn't acknowledge that he lost. Let's take a listen to that.
I have a piece of glass over here, and I don't have a piece of glass there. And I have this piece of glass here. But all we have really over here is the fake news, right? And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much, because I don't mind that. Our country the day that I left. I shouldn't have left. I mean, honestly, because we did so well. We had such a great. So now, I mean, every polling booth has hundreds of lawyers standing there. It's all about the lawyers. Everybody's standing lawyers. Nobody should have that.
So in the closing week here, much more of the focus has been on Madison Square Garden, Trump's own comments, et cetera, highlighting some of his most off-putting and most toxic traits. And so, you know, I don't think that's probably how the campaign wanted to close things out.
I mean, look, well, first of all, it's Trump's campaign, so he can close it how he wants. Now, the only problematic one electorally, I actually think, was the last one about not wanting to leave. That was the one. I mean, no one's going to cry for a joke about shooting through journalists. Like, no one's going to be, again, I don't believe all this Latino brouhaha around Puerto Rico. Could be wrong, you know, totally. I'm willing to eat it. If I am, we'll find out tomorrow. But the Stop the Steal was a big problem in Pennsylvania. And that actually is the one where you can see, in terms of his message discipline, that's the one which always has hurt him the most. Doug Mastriano lost by such massive margin last time around that is the one actually where if you were an advisor or something, you would be cringing about not wanting to leave the White House, because it was specifically that itself that turned a lot of people off in PA, people who were already Republicans, and then also cost them, Dr. Oz, I don't even remember the mess of an answer he had on Stop. It was bad. Even I remember that. In the disastrous Fetterman debate, even that one stood out of like, ooh, that was rough in terms of.
And that may have been the one that was most important.
And it probably was that up there with abortion. So, you know, in terms of the two things that turned voters off, I think that last clip was the most consequential, because apparently this is something he said a long time. I mean, look, it's just a bunch of bullshit talk. They did leave at the end of the day. But it's like, if you want to remind people of like genuinely one of the things that has turned the most voters off about you, that is the one which you would walk away from. But look, we'll see. Again, my theory on Trump is that all this shit is just baked in at this point, especially for a lot of men who are out there. They laugh, you know, if the criticism, they're like, it's funny. You know, the media bedwetting, they love it. There's nothing they love more. They want the jokes, play it. You know, let's spread them around. They think it's hilarious. Now, the big question is whether they're going to vote. And I do think that's a very open question. If there's a Harris landslide and it's because of the hidden women effect or something like that, there should be a male reassessment. There should be some therapizing that is happening in the male community. I mean, I've been trying to lead the charge on this by just saying, if your wife is afraid to tell you who they are voting for, you are a loser, and it means that you have a bad day. So let me tell you that. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.